Welcome back to Thoughtvolution, the podcast where we delve deep into the minds and stories of extraordinary individuals shaping our world. I'm your host, Stefan Dubier, and today we have a truly inspiring guest joining us. Meet Helen, an integral development coach hailing from the beautiful Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia. Helen has dedicated her life to understanding people on a profound level, helping them unlock their true potential and live more authentically. With her unique skill set and deep knowledge, Helen's work empowers individuals to embrace their true selves. Described by others as confident, caring, strong, intelligent, beautiful, and loving, Helen has a remarkable journey to share. She has transformed from a space of depression and self-doubt to a place of self-love and empowerment. In today's episode, we'll explore Helen's upbringing, being born from an affair and raised in a Christian household, and how these experiences shaped her views on God, belonging, and self-worth. Did you know that children born out of wedlock often face unique challenges, including higher rates of social stigma and psychological stress? Helen's story sheds light on these struggles and her path to overcoming them. Helen's story also touches on the complex dynamics of feminine and masculine identities. In a world where gender roles are constantly evolving, understanding the interplay between these identities is crucial. Helen's insights into these dynamics challenge traditional notions and encourage a more fluid and accepting view of gender. Helen's dream is to coach world leaders and influencers, guiding them to be more authentic and compassionate. Her approach is rooted in the belief that everyone, regardless of their background or status, is deserving of self-love and respect. This belief is especially relevant in today's world, where leaders are increasingly expected to show empathy and emotional intelligence. Helen gets along best with those open to growth and development, and is here to share her inspiring story with us, demonstrating that it's possible to overcome deep-seated self-hatred and embrace a life of freedom and self-acceptance. Her journey from self-doubt to empowerment is a powerful reminder that change is always possible, no matter where you start. So, sit back, my dear Thoughtvolutionists, relax, and join us as we uncover the powerful and inspiring journey of Helen right here on Thoughtvolution. This episode promises to be a deep dive into the human psyche, personal transformation, and the boundless potential within us all. Trigger warning. In this episode, we discuss topics related to depression, suicidal thoughts, and self-hatred, which may be triggering for some of our listeners. Either select another episode or please take care while listening and prioritize your own well-being. If you need support, consider reaching out to a mental health professional or a trusted individual. Thank you. Helen, thank you so much for being here for Thoughtvolution and for this episode about you and your story and your life. And I'm going to start with asking you about your dogs because I'm a dog lover myself. So can you tell us a bit about Minnie and Louie? What are they like? And what do they do on a daily basis?
I definitely can tell you what they're like. Minnie is the princess, a little bit. I've had her since she was a tiny puppy, and she is very ball obsessed. Loves to play ball. Louie as well. Minnie is very much her own independent self, and she will go after people for attention, and she will push people's boundaries to find where their breaking point to patting and playing with her are. Louis, on the other hand, is very protective of me, and he's my lump of love, and he does the best cuddles around. So yeah, they're very lovely. They sleep a lot. My housemate plays ball quite a bit, so they harass him when he's around. And then they just crash out most of the time with me and lay in the sun and enjoy the sunshine in Queensland.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So what's the weather like right now? It's 8 p.m. here, and you're starting your Saturday already. We're recording this on a Friday Eastern Standard Time, but you're already in tomorrow, basically.
Yes, yes, I'm talking to you from the future. It is sunshine, lovely. I'm just checking what the weather. Oh no, that's Hobart. It's 21 degrees here, Celsius. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit.
I'm from Germany. I'm still getting used to Fahrenheit. I just know that anything in the realm of like 80, 90, 100 is really warm. So I I would assume it's kind of in that territory. Now, you mentioned your dogs, and I know we're going to talk about also some humans in your life and some things that happened with said humans. Would you say that some people say that dogs are better than people? Could you agree with that, or what's your take on that?
For me, there's no better or worse in that sense. For me, animals, humans, plants are all part of sentient beings as one. It's just that they are different
Mhm.
in how they operate. So for me, I don't see a difference in that sense. There is probably a bit of a bias for my two because they're close to me and they're like my family. So yeah, in that way. In some ways you could say there's more benefits to dogs over children, but then there's more benefits for having children over dogs as well. Mine are perpetually a pair of 3-year-old siblings, so they will never grow
Aw.
out of that love-hate space, but it is very cute and adorable to watch.
Now, you mentioned that big word family, and I feel like everyone has their own definition of what that means. And you mentioned that your dogs are like your family. What would be your definition of that big word family?
Well, family is a concept, so it's a very subjective viewpoint. So as you said, each person views family as different. For me, from a biological sense, I no longer have any sort of immediate family. I have some cousins. So my definition of how I perceive family is a lot broader in more of a holistic space with people, and everyone is in a sense on some level part of family, but mainly a family for me is people that you interact with regularly, whether it's on a daily basis or a weekly basis. So, yeah, so for people who I interact with regularly, and that includes the dogs in that space, and that can ebb and flow over time. Sometimes you spend more time with one group of people or individuals, and then that can shift and move as people's lives, and then it can come back as well. Previously, when I was a lot younger, it was very much around having a partner and children and a happy tradition, what the traditional family unit would have been like. But as time has gone and I've grown, I understand it in a lot different context now.
And I kind of want to take a journey back with you. Now, I know that you've had a challenging upbringing. How did being born from an affair and being raised in a Christian household shape your early years and that definition of family that has now evolved into something much broader and much bigger than that?
So for me, I was born into a very white family. My mother's grandparents were English and migrated out to Australia, and my father's lineage was white settlers in Australia. So the very English style of tradition of family was you don't talk about scenarios and things that come out. And then, so my father wasn't around because he was with his family most of the time. And when I was younger, I got in trouble at school. And so I questioned it because I was quite a talkative and talk back child at the time. And he he got rather upset by that and stormed out. So it was the first time I recalled seeing my mother crying. And this is talking from my perception of looking back of how it potentially was. It was potentially in reality different, but my creation of the story of how it unfolded is as I'm telling it now. And being raised at a church and knowing one of the commandments that you learn very early on as a child is that adultery is a sin. And so I pieced together in my head that that meant I shouldn't exist. And in both the eyes of society and the church and God. And so for me, that created a level of distance that of not even self-loathing, but to the point where I shouldn't exist. And so that growing up, in a family where you don't talk about your emotions, you don't talk about your feelings, you have to keep things closed and it's very secretive. It led to high depression in high school when I was going through obviously changes and suicidal tendencies, and then into very much internal self-abuse and self-loathing in to the point where I would want to commit suicide and I would be fearful that I would survive. And so then I'd beat myself up for being too weak for not even being able to do that. And so I guess from that bore this drive, in a subconscious drive to not to get out of that, because I couldn't understand how other people were able to survive in the world and get up and do these things when I was feeling these intense emotions. And so it gave me the drive to attempt to understand and get happy, and I wanted to get happy and externally. So that's where it led on to this journey of self-discovery over years. And then in the last 5 years has been the most growth, because I've done a lot of self-reflective self-analysis of understanding my personality as it's constructed, as I've taken it on and been modeled it from my childhood, because we're not actually born with a personality. We are given it and we learn it and we adapt to it, and the stories that we tell ourselves. And so from understanding how my personality structure operates and how it plays out has really helped me become more objective to my subjective self, and see how they play out, and understand that I'm not that, and I'm not that story, and I'm not a child born avid and fair as a label. It's just that was how biologically the scenario came to be. And yeah, so really understanding the construct of humanity and what we make of it and the world is been incredibly life-changing.
Now, during that time of self loathing, self doubt, questioning if you should even exist, was there anybody you could confide in, whether it was in that church or whether it was within the family? Who did you go to
Oh,
get?
no. So,
Mhm.
yeah, no. Sorry to cut you off, but the answer is no. Because of that instance when I was about 6 or 7, where that was the time when my dad stormed off, my mum told me what had happened, but she told me I wasn't allowed to talk to anyone about it, because also she said my father wanted to tell me at a more age appropriate time. And I do recall the next day going and telling my best friend, but didn't make anything of it at the time and never really spoke to her again about it. And it was just that I also created this belief in my mind early on that my mother had been tricked by my father. Because I idolized my mum, at the time I thought she could do no wrong, so he must have inflicted this onto her and done this to her. That changed as I grew into more adulthood and had more conversations with my mother, that viewpoint. But so at the time, it was a protective method to protect my mum as well, because if I said something, then she might get in trouble or attacked, I guess, in that space.
Mhm.
So I didn't talk to anyone about it, and so I basically was attempting to figure it out in my head and piece it together of what everything meant and how it, yeah. And so that's where I got very my mind was able to very misconstrue what was happening in reality to create this false reality that created so much misery within myself.
If we had somebody listening, maybe similar age that you were, going through something similar, where do you think they could turn to get help in a situation like this?
Depending on the ages, obviously, if they're very, very young, I think it is important to talk to someone in authority about their experience of what's going on for them. As I mentioned to you before we started recording, one of my high values is openness, and I think there are elements of not necessarily having to go and broadcast it and talk about it, say on a podcast like I am, but having someone to be able to talk to, particularly a professional, I think is really important. And that professional could be a range of different people. I had my psychologist, who I still have on my footy team, as I call it, actually called it a footy team. He said, I'm part of your footy team. He goes, I want to be benched as long as I can, but when I'm needed on the field, I'll come in. So it's really around getting your football team of people that you can go to for different things. And that doesn't have to be all professionals. It can be certain friends who are who, you admire and think are knowledgeable in things. And yeah, so I think that's really important, is finding a diverse range of people to have on your team to help support you in what you need, and your growth in understanding the scenario, and understanding that it's and this is the challenging part, is really getting a team to help you understand that the feelings that you're experiencing are your own feelings on the scenario, and the scenario is just the scenario that's occurred. And so becoming more aware of self, and how we make ourselves feel.
Mhm. Now,
And always get a coach. Get a coach, as I say.
can can you share some specific moments or experiences that were pivotal in your transformation, going from self-loathing, not knowing whether you should even exist, to discovering that you can actually love yourself and that you can be in tune with yourself? What were some of those pivotal moments for you?
The the first one that I always recall occurring, and I don't recall where I read to do this or heard. I must have found it in something. And being overweight from an early age, I back in the 90s, the very, very thin ruler-like body shape was very popular, and that is not my body shape. And so I assimilated being overweight with being ugly. And so when I was in my early 20s and started going out, one of the things I practiced doing was putting my makeup on and getting ready, and then looking in the mirror and telling myself that I looked good, even though I didn't believe it. And then I recall one day I did the same routine and then said, "Oh, you look good." And then I walked off, and I stopped because there was a shift and a change. And I came back and I looked and I went, "Yeah, you do look good." And I realized that was sort of a big change for me, because it was probably one of the very first times that I counted myself in that sense, in what I did, rather than discounting how I looked or what I thought or how I was in that space. From there, some other points I had a girlfriend who ended up, after there was a particular person who had been on again, off again with, and had an obsession with. I thought we were to be together forever. And they eventually told me that no, it definitely wasn't going to be that. And it finally hit home for me. And so I had a friend take me to an energy worker, and she worked on me for a good hour and a half. And from there on, I started seeing someone in that space as well, as one of my team. And that really helped me start to shift some of the stiffness and the negativity, and what I was doing in my life, which was a lot of drinking at the time, drug abuse on weekends, not and just self-harming behaviors, essentially, all in a sense to escape what I was going through. And then Then another turning point, I think, for me was once mum passed away in 2018. There was a sense of freedom in one way about that. And that's not to say I didn't care and miss her, but I think it allowed me to gave me within myself the more option to, I could do what I needed to do in my life and be more free of having to be connected to her because it was just her and I in that sense. And then I started doing work with a company, the coaching room, in NLP work, neuro linguistic programming. And from there on, I did that in 2019, and that was the start of my coaching work, real coaching work that I did consistently. And in 2020, I went to South America and to Costa Rica, this just before lockdowns, and experienced ayahuasca, which is, for those that don't know, a psychedelic plant medicine that helps you release and connect in with elements of yourself and the plants. It's very hard to explain the experience until one's experienced it. And that was also life-changing for me. It just shifted. I can't quite explain what it shifted, but it shifted so much in my life. And then coming back into COVID, the lockdowns was another pivotal time because I was isolated by myself. I didn't have visitors because I didn't have close friends where I was living that were part of a circle we could connect up with. And I went deep into the learnings of NLP, moved to the Sunshine Coast and continued that work into what is called integral coaching, which is based on Ken Wilber's work of the quadrants and stages of development. And through that work over the last 2 years in particular has just been transformational. And I couldn't pinpoint a specific point in that journey because it's just this continuous unraveling and experiences and but each time I take a pause and look back 6 months, there's been a shift and a change within myself. Outwardly, there may not appear to be, but inwardly, the way I see myself and perceive myself is so much more different. And because of that, it has given me more ability to care and love in a much more genuine way rather than doing it in order to achieve something back.
I think that's beautiful. And I kind of want to go back to that image that you painted there with you actually for the first time perhaps telling yourself that you're beautiful. And obviously we live at the, we live during the time of social media and of, I would say, the probably the biggest time of judgment that we've ever experienced in history, where everyone feels like they are entitled to an opinion about our bodies, about the pictures that we post, about our lives in a way. What would you say to a young person out there who is not able to tell themselves that they're beautiful because everyone on social media is telling them that they're not, that they're overweight, that they're ugly? What would you say to somebody like that who struggles with that? Because I feel like it's very hard to internalize something like that when there are so many loud voices around you.
Absolutely. And look, it is very easy to be influenced by one's environment, and that's clearly evidenced with addicts when they go into rehab and come back out. And so when you're surrounded by it's very easy to take that on and believe it. And I did that in the back when I was a teenager with what was seen in back in those days magazines and television. And I think the reality is and it's quite difficult for kids. Again, it's A, seeking support in the realm for what you need, and finding those voices of support. It would be with the social media. If it's social media, definitely just delete it. Delete social media for a while, have a detox from social media. I know I get addicted to social media. And so even I just delete the apps and I come back to them at times. But the biggest thing to learn and understand is how we perceive ourselves is actually our own, is ourselves and our own internal self. Out there, we only allow out there to influence us, and it is very influential, but really starting to learn to take ownership of self and understanding where where the where the values and the beliefs are coming from that make these other people's things impact you is true. I'm not sure that was worded correct how I needed to express it. However, it's really understanding that we can only really affect ourselves. So the focus, it just comes back to focusing on self and really understanding what makes us truly beautiful is acceptance of who we are and loving ourselves as we choose to show up in the world, and that no one else has permission to say we can't show up in the world this way. But we also have to understand that people don't always accept how we are choosing to show up, and that's okay because that's their issue. If someone on social media is saying something to you about your fat or da da da, it actually says more about them than it does about you, because all they're doing is reflecting a part of their map of reality. And so sometimes it's just to feel pity for them because they can't see a broader perspective.
And because they haven't figured it out yet, right? I mean, I always tell my kids, you don't have control over what somebody else does, but you do have control over how you react and what you do in your life.
Absolutely. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely. That is 100% correct. The only things that we can control in ourselves is what we say, what we do, what we think, and what we feel. The last one, some people might not grasp, but the reality is what we feel, is actually thoughts beforehand, and we can actually learn to shift and change our thoughts. And that mirror exercises that I did back when I was in my early 20s is clear example of that we can change how we perceive ourselves.
Absolutely. Now, how do you reconcile your upbringing in the Christian faith with your current spiritual beliefs?
For me, I understand. I mean, again, I understand how I construed the words that are have been written by other humans at some point in time based on their perceptions of the world at that time, which, have shifted and changed over the last 2,000 years. I understand. I rejected Christianity quite early on and was very angry at the church and at God for a very long time. But now I understand Christianity as a faith that people go to as part of a community to feel to belong, which is one of, core need and drive that humans have. And that the interpretation of the Christianity faith is by individuals and ministers, and that are their perception. And that the core belief, in my opinion, of any religion is one of love and sharing love with others. And for me, that is ultimately, from a spiritual sense, what I perceive is is about just how to be love in this moment without any of my beliefs or values or frames playing into that element, and just to be fully present and love in the moment of whatever I am doing and whoever I'm with.
And at the end of the day, like you said, the essence of it should be love. And sadly, oftentimes when we hear about religious movements nowadays, it's often very much a message that does not echo love. It's a message of exclusion oftentimes. Now,
Yeah, and that
mhm,
yeah, that comes down to people's stages of development, and in the sense that a lot of them are at a stage of development which is still at that very black and white. It's us versus them. If you don't believe in what we believe in, then you are wrong, and so we must eliminate you because you must be bad because we are right and we are good. And that's a very generalist view of it. But another example of that is your favorite football team. There are people who get very distraught if their football team loses, or very, elated when their football team wins. It's like, yes, that they've won, and it's like, we've won, we've done it, and it's sort of like, love, you just sat and watched the TV. You didn't actually play the game. But it becomes it becomes this part of them of like, this is us, this is our team. And if you go for the other team, then you're not right, you are wrong. And so it's sad to witness at the moment, to see leaders still at that, coming from that stage of development, because it does hinder humanity's growth and development overall. Because when you take your core needs, a human's core needs, away from them, that's all their focus is. They don't have time or energy or any ability to focus on becoming more self-aware and self-actualized. All they do is their mere life is about survival again. So yeah.
Now that's a very nice segue into my next question, because I was going to ask you. I know that one of your dreams. I know you have your coaching business, and we'll talk in more detail about that. As someone who dreams of coaching world leaders, what qualities do you believe are essential for effective leadership in this divided world that we live in?
Oh, I like this question. For me, a leader is somebody who is basically leading by example. And a leader is someone who understands multiple perspectives. And for me, that's understanding first person perspective, which is the self, understanding the we perspective, so the you and I in this space of how that relates together. And then third person perspective, seeing how that relationship is working together and how that's operating, but also from a next level of being able to see a fourth person perspective, which is really about the systems and processes that are affected by us having this connection and relationship and performing out and things. Yeah. And so by being able to look at the four perspectives holistically, it gives them an overarching ability to be able to see where there might be things that need improving or suggesting, or things where things are working really, really well and working towards that space. So it gives them a lot more flexibility to be able to analyze and see things from what's going on from an overarching perspective of the team or the company or the country that they're leading in by being able to do that, or at least build a team around them that can work to all those four perspectives, rather than just perhaps being stuck in looking at one perspective of, I believe that this is the right thing to do and I'm going to make something great again, kind of element. And as opposed to sort of like, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to lock down our country because this is what we need to do to survive as a country.
Now, obviously, we're having this conversation. You're in Australia, I'm in the US. Let's say I sent you Donald Trump, of all people, for coaching.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I think you would have your work cut out for you. What would you do with this person? Like, what would you do with somebody like a Donald Trump, who has the reputation of being very unpredictable, who maybe even has the reputation of being somewhat uncoachable? How would you
So
coach somebody like him?
from where Donald is from a stage structure, is he's still quite at a lower stage structure. So he's very much at what we call a red stage of red to amber. So it's very, very eye centric and very, very black and white, us versus them. And he probably isn't at a stage to be coached, which is where, the uncoachable element comes in. I think where, if it was me, I would probably be more likely to see and agree with him that he has actually had quite a lot of trauma in his life as a young child, and really relate to him and get and by being able to relate with him, then start to sort of move him into being able to see some other perspectives. Because he it's very common knowledge he's experienced quite a lot of trauma from his father, and
Mm.
so that's why where he is, where he's at in his uh, thinking capacity, and how where he's at, because he probably hasn't worked on that at all. And I think it's not something, it's something that would be a very slow process and probably more of a psychology area rather than a coaching area to begin with. And just to sort of, in that sense, I think that would probably be the starting point, and just to see where he's at in that space. And yeah, and then sort of navigate him to understand what his needs are in order to be validated, which from observing on the outside is to appear powerful and being the best and be in control. And so seeing where that could be leading, not necessarily leading him, but getting him to become aware of where else he might be able to achieve that, and not necessarily on a world stage space, but given he's already been in that space, that would potentially be a challenge to move his sights from that. would be my mind read.
I think that's very interesting because we often forget how trauma affects us in almost everything we do, right? I mean, the things we experience in the past, even if we have moved past them, it doesn't necessarily mean that we've processed them. If you could give somebody with trauma who's trying to actually really process this almost like a toolbox, what tools would be in it? What are some techniques that you would recommend to them to fully process trauma so that they are actually ready to move on from it?
Well, firstly, everyone's dealt with some form of trauma in their life as a child, and it might not be anything major such as a war, but our mind has created that, and that's how we develop our patterns of behavior, which eventually turn into our personality. And so I think it's understanding that we aren't our trauma, and that we aren't our personality, and what our habits are that may be more unresourceful for us were put in place because once they did work for us. And so, from a starting point of someone wanting to look at dealing with their trauma, I mean, there's so many ranges. I think it depends on where somebody is at as well, and what sort of trauma they've had. I believe, again, it's a very individualistic space. So one of the first things I would do is look at building your team, as I talked about before, your football team or your cheerleading team, and find the team that's going to support you. And that can be, a whole range of different elements in that space. So that's one of the first things, is really find the team and the stuff that's going to work for you. And look, it can involve doing things like, sometimes it's exercise for people, sometimes it's going and doing something out of their comfort zone, and just sort of learn to stretch that and understand that we aren't our trauma, and that's, but we're also allowed to experience the world as we're experiencing it. I think that's the first thing in the toolbox. One of the things I think, when someone's ready, it's coaching is something that is highly valuable for anybody, and there are a whole range of levels of coaches out there. So for me, you can have a performance coach which will help you achieve a goal, but then having a life coach, mindset coach is really good for understanding some patterns in that. But if you really want to understand yourself as an individual and how your patterns of behavior have been created, then seeing an integral or developmental coach will fast track that work immensely.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the past 5 or so years have been probably the best in your life. Would you say that there are still setbacks and challenges? And how do you handle those now compared to your younger self?
So for me, it's not. I mean, the last 4 years, there's been a lot of challenges in that space for me to process. One of the things for me that the biggest steps I've had probably a couple of years ago was really understanding that I don't necessarily name things as challenges or setbacks now because of the potential connotations that could come with that. What I look at is if there is something that comes up that feels a little bit uncomfortable, I I lean into it and understand where is the growth element here? What can I learn from this scenario? What's the feedback? Because one of the my favorite NLP's presuppositions is there is no failure, only feedback. So it's really important for me to understand that if something happens that may not be as nice or comfortable, there's a growth of understanding of what what's going on for me in this scenario. What can I learn from this about myself in order to be more okay when this situation arises again? And that then allows me to easily move through day-to-day life and scenarios without getting caught up in something where, for example, I previously used to get so frustrated in traffic, would be yelling in the car of like, what's going on, and carry on and swearing. And now I just sort of take a moment back and just sort of look around at my surroundings rather than getting caught up in the fact that, oh, there's cars that aren't moving as fast as the speed limit is.
which is which is also really freeing when you think about it. We waste so much precious time of our lives being angry at things that we can't control, being upset with ourselves for things that are beyond our control. Like, if we channeled that anger and turned it into something positive, we would all be so much happier and we wouldn't waste so much time. What do you
Yeah, I
think?
think I think sorry, go.
What do you
I get
think?
so excited by this topic. I get I jump in all the time.
No problem at all. No problem at all. I was gonna ask, what do you think is your biggest time waster still that you're working on? And what are some tricks that you use to not waste as much precious lifetime?
So for me, probably one of the things that I'm working on is my doom scrolling. I can get quite caught up in just mindless scrolling at times and getting caught watching TV series because growing up TV was one of my best friends while mum was busy. So working on that, but one of the first steps is also to understand it when I'm doing it and fully accept that I'm doing it and embrace the fact, okay, well, I'm going to do this. I'm accepting, I'm choosing to do this. So I don't beat myself up about it. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, this is where I'm at right now. This is what I'm doing. And that in a way frees me to then have a greater choice to go, no, I'm not really in the mood for this, or I'm just going to switch it off or do something else. And it has helped shift how much time I do spend scrolling. And I caught myself earlier, actually this morning, doing it, and I went, okay, let's stop. And I realized because I downloaded the app to upload a photo, and I'm like, right, let's delete the app again, and do that. And I didn't beat myself up for the fact I was doom scrolling. I went, okay, I'm doing this. This is the habit I'm playing out, right? What's my choice here? I can continue to do this or I can do that. And whichever choice I made in that moment was okay.
Because it was conscious and because you were aware of it. And I think
Yeah.
that growing awareness is so liberating. Actually knowing, hey, okay, I'm doing this, but I'm okay with it. I'm giving quote unquote, I'm giving myself permission to do this.
Yeah. And in some ways that's almost letting it be able to be go, because when we're pushing to try and stop something, when you've got to push something, you've actually got to touch it to move it. So you're actually bringing something closer to you when you try and push or get rid of something. So by simply embracing and understanding standing it, and for me part of it is also understanding the reasons and the meaning behind it potentially, and then learning about that and what meaning I'm giving to it, and everything, and then understanding that helps you free myself from that meaning as well.
And life, after all, is evolution. It's all about evolving, right? So, one thing that your view has evolved on is femininity and masculinity. How has that view evolved over time, and where do you stand now when it comes to gender roles?
This is again another good question that I like at the moment, because it is such a hot topic on various fronts. So there's two things to understand about gender identity and everything like that. So we have biological features that we can either change through surgery. So that whether you're a biological female, biological male, or biologically you're born with both or none, or you've changed them. Then separate to that is how you identify. And that is a construct in itself. So how one chooses to identify is totally a choice. I could choose to identify as a unicorn if I want. That's the construct I've decided to create. It doesn't change my physical appearance unless I have surgery, but that still doesn't change the biological physiological elements of me. So I think it's understanding that differentiation in that sense. And the same applies to femininity and masculinity. Now, it's actually femininity and masculinity is a construct. There are shared group understandings of what those mean, but there are still differences of what people interpret what a femininity and a masculinity is. You have, and a clear example of that for men is you have the Andrew Tates
Oh,
of the
oh
world,
God.
who have that particular viewpoint of what masculinity is. But then you also have the men who run around a circle embracing their sacred femininity as believing that's a part of important masculinity growth. And both of them are actually true for those individuals. And so understanding what it is to be a masculine man or a feminine female or a masculine female, because we can have both elements in us, because again, it's a construct. So it's understanding that. And part of, for me, where I get passionate about this is for men, because over the last 150 years, societal's view of women, and therefore, in a sense, femininity, has shifted significantly to the point from women were at home and had this role to now that women are able to be in the workforce as well, which was another construction that was constructed for men, hence why women are struggling in the workforce in some ways. But what hasn't happened in that time is that's a major shift for humanity. But what hasn't happened is men haven't had that same sort of growth and evolution of what it means for them to be men in this shifting role. And I think that's where now there is this issue for a lot of men of who they are and what they are, because the traditional roles that society gave men in some ways expected to still apply by both men and women. Women have these viewpoints of the type of men that they want to be with, and they're very traditional old school ways of the provider and all this. But those roles have shifted and changed, they're not available for men as they were because of women being in the workforce in that space. And I'm definitely not saying women need to go back home. I think what has to happen is for both men and women to shift their ideal of what it means to be a man. And rather than having a definition of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, it's more of an understanding of what do we want to be as human beings?
Mhm.
And then as an individual, what am I choosing to show and represent myself as, based on who I'm choosing my personality to be?
I'm kind of taking this back to something you said earlier about that football team, right? We're
Yep.
we're looking at it as we the men, we the women, when in reality it's the question should just be, what does it mean to be you? You in particular. And I think the problem with masculinity, femininity, and our kind of definition of these terms is that we assign them to groups. Like, you have the
Mhm.
Andrew Tate people who are very high on the masculine spectrum, I would say, to the point where we even, carved the term toxic masculinity, where it's very aggressive, it's very abrasive. And
Which is another construct and just feeds into the Andrew Tate mentality of the
mhm,
world.
mhm. Yep. But at the end of the day, it why does it matter? This is what I always ask myself. Why does it matter so much? Because as long as we still see the world, because masculinity and femininity goes back to a very binary world that we try to create in our brains. And I sometimes think our brains are not designed for a broader way to think, or at least we keep ourselves in this constraint of thinking in black and white, right and left. We want to think in this binary world, so there's masculine and feminine, and at the end of the day we forget that every person is unique in who they are, in what they stand for, what their values are. And instead of celebrating that and seeing a person as an individual, we try to put them in these categories, in these boxes. And then you go to schools where if a boy does something that's attributed as feminine, other kids call him a pussy, right? We diminish it, and we try to ridicule it instead of just saying, okay, this is what that person is like. You know what I mean? It's I wish we had I wish we didn't have this tunnel vision, that self-imposed tunnel vision. And I'm really hoping that that this binary world gets a little more shattered, so that we start seeing people, as human beings, and not as male or female, or masculine, feminine, or black or white, or gay or straight, or like, it doesn't matter, and it shouldn't matter anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it shouldn't matter in things, and this comes back to people's stages of development. And it's, as people go through stages, it's sort of, the vast majority of humans are sort of in a, what we call tier 1 stage of development. And as we're evolving, and people are unable to see beyond their own biases. And so that's where the work in this developmental space for me is so important, because the more people can move through these stages and gain greater perspectives, the more accepting and understanding that they can be of people from where they're at. Because again, we're not born to be at a particular stage. It takes time to evolve through the stages. From when we're born, we're all at stage 1. And so it's about nurturing children and humans in this continual evolution of development, and really working on oneself, and understanding that we all have our limitations, that we cannot see everything. And if we even if we can't necessarily understand somebody else, accepting that based on their upbringing, their growth, that is where they are currently at. And again, it comes back to this love of just loving them for them, even though I don't necessarily agree with you. And I think if we can get to a space where humanity nurtures us more in that space of acceptance and understanding ourselves as we grow up, and our individuality, and then learning to understand that we actually aren't individual, we are all the same essence, and not just
Mhm.
as humans, but as the planet and the stars and the sky and the plants and everything. And that it we can just be and accept things as they are.
I think I think it's accepting, and there's also a huge element of respect, like actually respecting the individuality of a person within that grander thing, that grander construct that is our world, right? It's it's about respecting them for, you know,
Well, yeah, I mean, respecting it is an interesting one, because again, that's a subjective view of what you're meaning by respect versus, say, what I mean by respect, versus, say, what someone in China might view as
mhm.
respectful, and what somebody in the Middle East will perceive as respectful. So that's a very subjective view as well, and presupposes, with respect, the other end of the stick is presupposing that there is disrespect. In order to have to respect somebody, we've got to know how to disrespect them first.
Well,
And
I
so I
guess
think,
I
yeah,
guess I would define it as, it's none of my business what somebody let's say what somebody does in their bedroom, for example.
Yeah.
Like how, like I can respect that that is their privacy, for example. And I think we've kind of ignored, again, social media is kind of an escalator for that, but we've kind of ignored people's privacy and their right to being an individual within within that world that we live in, by imposing our views on them. Like, religion is a good example. I'm 100% for religious freedom. Everyone should be allowed to practice the religion they want to practice, or not practice a religion. And that means that there will be people in my world not having the same belief system. And if I want my religious view to be respected, quote unquote, for lack of a better word at this point, I need to extend that same privilege to them as well. And even if people make life choices, like you said earlier, that I would not make for my own life, I just have a little issue with the term acceptance, because it kind of, in the past years we often use the term tolerance, right? I tolerate it. And tolerating
Mm.
it means like it's less than, but I will let it slide. That's kind of what's implied here. You know what I mean? So for me, it's respect means that I acknowledge that people have a right to make different life choices. And even if those choices are different from mine, that's okay. I'm not just accepting it. I'm not just tolerating it. I'm respecting it. And so my definition, I guess, is just a little bit stronger of a live and let live mentality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, for you, what I'm hearing is, something that the word, respect is a very is a high value for you, that you hold on as something that is important for you, which is totally fine and okay, that's what you hold. Like for me, as I mentioned earlier, I've got honesty and openness in those
Mhm.
spaces as high values, but I also now have learnt that if somebody isn't in that space, that's okay. That's just where they
Mhm.
are. They are
Mhm.
as well, and don't hold on to them in that space. So yeah, it's interesting once going down the rabbit hole and starting to understand how we create meaning with language. Because I mean, language itself is a construct.
Yeah.
We have to teach our we have to teach our children how to speak, and then sometimes not so effectively. And so language in itself is a construct. So in order for us to have this conversation, we have to create meaning in our own subjective worlds of what we mean, and we have the shared meaning, which is the sort of that lower left space, the we space of you and I speaking English. So we have a shared meaning about what particular words mean to some level, but then they can be layered and emphasized on by other meanings that we create and give it in our mind.
I love this. Based on your evolution, your personal evolution in your life, what has been the most rewarding part of your journey so far?
Freedom from myself is what comes up. I think that is there is just not lack is not the right term. Having held so much attachment to certain things of how they should have been, how things should be, or how if things don't work out, and creating all these stories on, particularly for me, that the shift in my personality is the judgment I used to place on myself through the eyes of others. So for me, an example might have been, if I was still playing that out, is, oh, Stefan is judging me because of my accent or what I've said too many times in this. And so he must be thinking what a terrible podcaster I am. And just being able to be free from separating it from originally thinking that it was what you were thinking, because you must think the same way as me, to understanding that that is actually how I'm thinking about myself, to then being now at a point where it doesn't it doesn't attach them. The thoughts are very rarely, if they do come up, and just seeing and witnessing them and not creating an emotional attachment to them. And what that has given me is I'm the word happiness isn't correct, because it's more of a contentment, because happiness again presupposes sadness on the other end. So I guess there's more of a contentment and stillness and calmness within myself, and more silence from my head, that is just so freeing and liberating. And that in itself just makes me love my life and love the world more.
Now, one day, hopefully in many, 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 many years, we're going to have to, in some way, say goodbye to this life. What legacy do you hope to leave behind through your work?
For me, it is around supporting those around me to understand themselves better, so that they don't create a world of misery in their own minds of their reality. So it's really supporting people to become freer, like I have, of how I see the world, and understanding it to be happier. I guess using the word happiness in that sense, or contentment, or seeking whatever they're seeking, to become more aware of that, to grow, to help people grow and develop in order to live the lives that they want and live their purpose on this earth. Even supporting just a couple of people in that can help shift and change humanity, if humanity is ready to make that leap.
Now, my kids and I just recently went and watched Inside Out 2, and
Mhm.
you have the different emotions there, and we talk about happiness right now, which of course is a wonderful emotion, but there are also sadness, anxiety, and the message of the movie is kind of embrace all of your emotions because they make you. What's your opinion about that?
So for me, when I mentioned, one of the things that we actually do have control over is our feelings. So we actually, the core emotions, we have two types of emotions. We have our primary emotion and then secondary emotion. Primary emotions are our initial reaction to something. So if a snake flies into your face, there's more of a likely chance a lot of people just jump and scream. And that's the initial one. That lasts only zero point 0.3 of a second. Anything that we feel after that is something that we have created via our thoughts. And that can sound a bit astonishing to people, because it's like, I can't control my anxiety. But it really is understanding that our emotions and our feelings have been created based on how we have created, how we perceive reality should be, based on the filters that we've got in our minds of reality. And that is our beliefs, our values, our memories, and our time, and just how that has then plays out in our life, and how much we then distort reality and generalize in that space. And so once we can actually understand what the meaning behind those feelings are, then we again can have that freedom and choice, and to not be had by our emotions as they're coming up. One of the things, a practice that I did once, was I would have these physiological expressions of things, and I'd call them panic attacks in the mornings. And one day I chose to go, okay, I'm not going to call this a panic attack. I think I called it the feeling formerly known as a panic attack, because I didn't want to give it another label. And as soon as I stopped attaching the words panic attack to it, they seem to get easier. And so when there's a physiological moment arising in my body that I used to associate with an emotion, I'm like, okay, is there something going on with my body here? And if tears arise, I don't label them as happiness or sadness. It's the physiological reactions of what's happening in that moment, and sort of embracing those. And once we can learn to again understand that our thoughts and our feelings aren't actually us, and that they are just part of what we've modeled and created as our personality, and can become more objective to that, then we aren't had by them.
That is mind-blowing. I have never looked at it like that, but it's very interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and to be honest, when I think the first time my coaches brought that up, I recall my brain can't control this. I don't have any control. I don't have. I'm not able to control how I feel, and but as soon as I start looking at it and going, okay, what does this mean? And a lot of it for me and my own personal experience of where my depression and anxiety comes from. And don't get me wrong, there are physiological occurrences that happen that help create the anxiety and depression from a chemical perspective.
Mhm.
But for me, what's really helped is by understanding that where that all stemmed from was this desire and this drive to be liked and to be loved, because I placed my value and my love on other people because I didn't believe I should exist as a child. I didn't there was no self-worth, there was no esteem, there was no love for self, and the only way that I could get love was outside of myself. And so because I wasn't feeling like I was getting that, I was then placing sadness upon sadness, which then creates depression, and then understanding that anxiety in itself is a pattern of forward projection, so future orientating worst case scenario. So I would create a scenario into the future and like worst case it, so I was prepared. Whereas depression, which I also had, was looking at the past and evaluating my present moment based on the past and sort of going and creating a sadness and placing sadness on sadness. And so once I was able to understand that, that's what I was able to work on, was this need and desire to be loved by others in order to validate myself and give myself worth. And so because I worked on that, I now don't experience these elements that I did, because I've created this space where I know that I am loved. I know that I belong because because I am essentially. So yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff when you once start looking at it.
It's a powerful image of you becoming unstuck, because like your mind racing to depression mode in the past and then racing to anxiety mode in the future, and you unstuck yourself. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
What are you most excited about in the coming year?
For me, what I'm working on most is being comfortable in the uncomfortable. That is something that continues to work on. And so for me, there's a little bit of an unknown moving into the future. There's a rough plan, but learning to have an idea of where a direction I'm going at this moment to take steps for a day to day, but not holding on to it as rigidly of how it's meant to be or how it's meant to unfurl. And so for me, the excitement in the next year is just to see what occurs over this next 12 months of who I become. I've recently started one of the big frames and beliefs I had around food and my worth and my size. I've been doing a lot of work on that. So I've recently started taking the Monjaro injections, which is a weight loss drug. And so for me, in order for me to become more active and fit and healthy, and based on a range of health issues that I've had. And so for me, I guess that's the most exciting thing moving forward is my health and fitness and becoming healthier and more active and alive, so that I can again show up in the world as I'm needed.
That's awesome. Now, any of our listeners that are interested in following your continued journey, how are they able to connect with you, and how can they learn more about you, your work, your coaching?
I do have my website. It is helenfrancisofficial.com, I believe, and that's Francis with a CES. Otherwise, I am on social media under Helen Francis. So on both Facebook, Instagram, can reach out to me there. If you're interested in experiencing seeing yourself in a new light and having a conversation like no other, I do offer a free intake sessions, which there's no selling. It's just for the experience of experiencing a session with me. And that can be booked on my website as well.
Helen, thank you so much. This has been a mind-opening conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible episode of Thoughtvolution. Helen's story is a powerful reminder that no matter where we start in our own lives, we have the potential to transform those lives and embrace our true selves if we choose to do so. I hope you found her journey as inspiring and enlightening as I did. Now, as we conclude this episode, I want to remind you that this is just one of many thought-provoking conversations that we have here on Thoughtvolution. To stay connected with us and never miss a single episode, make sure to visit our website at thoughtvolutionpodcast.com. That is thoughtvolutionpodcast.com. There you'll find more insightful conversations. While you're on our website, don't forget to check out our little merch store. We have a variety of Thoughtvolution gear that not only helps support the show, but it also allows you to carry a piece of inspiration with you wherever you go. From t-shirts to all kinds of merch, there's something for everyone. I would also love for you to join our little community on social media. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok to stay updated on future episodes. Your feedback and support mean the world to me. If you enjoyed this episode, or if you didn't, please take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Reviews help reach more people and continue to bring more inspiring stories and insightful conversations. Share this episode with your friends and family and invite them to join our little community of thought leaders and change makers. Lastly, I want to hear from you. If you have questions, comments, suggestions for future episodes, or if you would like to be a guest on this show, feel free to reach out to me on social media or through our website. Your input helps us create content that resonates with you and addresses the topics you are most passionate about. This podcast is not just my podcast, it's our podcast. Once again, thank you for tuning in to Thoughtvolution. Helen's journey is such a testament to the power of resilience, self-discovery, and the endless possibilities that lie within each of us. Until next time, keep evolving your thoughts, embracing your authentic self, and striving for growth. Have a wonderful day. I look forward to sharing more inspiring stories with you soon, and I love you lotsies.